What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. The Interesting Life of Anne Lister, the model for HBO's Gentleman Jack. The HBO drama Gentleman Jack is about the love story of Anne Lister and her wife, Anne Walker, in the 1800s in England. Lister is frequently referred to as the first modern lesbian. He was a wealthy landowner, entrepreneur, and diarist. She wrote in coded prose about her life and various love affairs in 27 volumes of massive diaries that she kept throughout her life. Just as there is a vast history of transgender people, so too is there a rich history of fluid identities and sexual orientations, but many of these stories have been lost to time or purposely hidden away. The candid, daring journals of Lister almost joined this sea of lost queer voices. However, one of her descendants concealed the diaries within the family manor's walls to safeguard the extremely significant historical records for future generations. The journals document the openly lesbian entrepreneur's day-to-day life, love, and lust in Georgian England. Lister was an unmanageable tomboy who learned the classics by himself. Lister, who was born in 1791 to a minor aristocratic family, wrote in her diary that as a child she was an unmanageable tomboy, and that she was sent to school early because they could do nothing with me at home. Lister was born into this family. Lister was a bright student who concentrated on subjects that are typically thought of as being unfeminine, like Latin, math, and science. Additionally, she educated herself on the subjects of poetry from ancient Greece and Rome. In her coded diaries, Lister described her romantic exploits. When Lister was a teenager, she started keeping extensive journals, which she continued throughout her life. About 1/6 of Lister's diaries are written in crypthand, or her own invented code derived from algebra and the Greek alphabet. Convinced no one would ever be able to decode the steamier portions of her journals, Lister detailed her various love affairs freely. However, she was wrong about the code being unbreakable. Lister's descendant broke the code and hid the diary in the manor walls. In 1867, one of Lister's descendants, John Lister, cracked the code with his friend Arthur Burrell and learned of his relative's various love affairs with women. However, the coded portions of Lister's diary were not deciphered until decades after her death. Burrell urged John to burn the journals, but instead, he hid the diaries behind the wall paneling of Lister's old room. When Shibden Hall became a museum, the diaries were rediscovered but remained largely unknown until the 1980s when a number of scholars published portions of them. Helena Whitbread, one of the scholars in question, had uncovered a candid and in-depth account of Lister's life and sexuality, and she made sure that Lister's diary became a significant and historic addition to the canon of lesbian literature. In her diaries, Lister penned more than 4 million words. Lister's journals, which have approximately 6,600 pages and 4 million words each, not only contain the nitty-gritty details of her day-to-day life, but also tell the story of her emotional, psychological, and intimate landscape. In her crypthand, which she used for about 1/6 of the diary, Lister was particularly forthright, focusing primarily on the more intimate and passionate details of her various love affairs. Helena Whitbread, a scholar, said of Lister's coded writings, "It's groundbreaking material that is completely transparent and describes every action. It's very sinister and very compelling." Teenage Lister fell in love with her classmate Eliza Raine. Lister had many lovers over her lifetime, and details about each were chronicled in her diaries. At first, Lister fell in love with Eliza Raine, a classmate at her boarding school who was born in Madras. At the time, they shared a room and even traded rings. Raine, according to a number of sources, never recovered and lost her mind when Lister moved on to courting other women. Some sources even suggest Lister may have had something to do with Raine being committed to an asylum, though this has not been definitively proven as of 2019. She openly and successfully courted women. Lister wrote in one of her diaries from 1820, "I love and only love the fairer sex and thus beloved by them in turn, my heart revolts from any other love than theirs." After her relationship with Eliza Raine cooled, Lister had a series of lovers. She courted Isabella Tibb Norcliffe but left her after she was introduced to the love of her life, Mariana Belcombe. Lister fell in love with Belcombe, M, as she's referred to in the diaries, around her 20s. Their affair continued for some time, despite Lister's devastation after Belcombe entered into a financially advantageous marriage to Charles Lawton. Meanwhile, Lister courted a widow named Maria Barlow while living in Paris from 1824 to 1826. At some point, Lister decided she wanted a partner who could help her attain a higher social status, settling on the young and wealthy Anne Walker. Walker and Lister married before traveling extensively together and having a complicated union. She preferred to wear masculine-inspired clothes made of black fabric. Lister preferred comfortable masculine clothing and shoes to petticoats and corsets, and she always wore all black. In a portion of her diary that she wrote on August 9, 1818, when she was 28 years old, Lister describes a woman who was attempting to feminize her and marry her off. Mrs. Page started talking about my wedding. Told me I had a good figure, good complexion, held myself well and was, she thought, good-tempered. That I ought to be attractive if I wore curls and bows in my hair, as they currently do. She is a vulgar, good sort of woman, fond of giving her opinions and advice. I tolerated everything well, found it amusing, encouraged and praised her, and I dare say passed with flying colors. In search of queer literature, she studied poetry from ancient Greece and Rome. Lister suggested to her lover Eliza Raine that she study classical Greek and Roman poetry when she was a teenager. She explored the erotic passages and details involving same-sex relationships with great interest. She had no reservations about her sexuality or her faith and was a fervent Christian. Helena Whitbread, who published Lister's diaries in the 1980s, stated that Lister had no reservations about her sexuality and had a straightforward relationship with her faith. Whitbread went on. Her firm belief was that as God had endowed her with her sexual nature, it would be wrong to act against it. She was a part of the first documented lesbian marriage in Britain. Lister and Walker wanted God to acknowledge their union after they exchanged vows, rings, and lived together openly. Helena Whitbread, an event biographer, claims that Lister saw the couple taking communion at Holy Trinity Church in York, England. Sealing, the matrimonial pact in which they had entered, the church becoming an icon for what is interpreted as the site of the first lesbian marriage to be held in Britain. The couple got married 180 years before same-sex marriage became legal in the UK. Even in 2019, the Church of England does not allow same-sex couples to be recognized or have a church ceremony. She inherited her family's immense estate. Lister inherited Shibden Hall in 1826 following the death of her uncle, who belonged to a prominent and wealthy Halifax family. Shibden Hall was originally a medieval-style manor house with a wooden frame. Once Lister inherited the home, she set to work redesigning the grounds and the interior. It was her intention to improve the manor to show the family's wealth and social standing, as well as to provide a place for her private relationships to flourish. Lister fixed the Tudor house's deteriorating timbers and constructed extravagant gardens with waterfalls and a parkland in the Romantic style. She added a gallery, updated the library with modern bathrooms, and displayed the carved Lister lion as the family symbol. Shibden Hall was able to make money thanks to Lister's entrepreneurial skills. Lister managed the estate in a way that was meant to preserve the hall for future generations while earning her income in the intervening years. She was an entrepreneur in her goals and business dealings. Lister monetized her surplus water, rented farms and cottages on her land, and oversaw her estate's production of timber, stone, and coal. Her marriage to Anne Walker, a shy and very wealthy heiress, provided the financial backing for her business and landowning interests. Her partner embalmed her remains after she passed away. During their marriage, Lister and Anne Walker traveled extensively. Lister succumbed to a fever in Russia on their final journey in 1840, at the age of 49. Walker had Lister's remains embalmed and transferred in a coffin back to Yorkshire, England, where her body was buried in Halifax Parish Church. Lister's diaries provide insight into Georgian society. Although Lister's writings provide extensive details on the social history of the Georgian era and her network of friends and acquaintances, their depiction of lesbian relationships in the 1800s is particularly significant. Scholar Helena Whitbread said, Lister's depiction of Halifax resembles a cross between the 19th-century novel Cranford and Jane Austen. UNESCO listed her diaries as cultural heritage in 2011. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, added Helena Whitbread's edited and published Lister's diaries to the memory of the World Register as a comprehensive and painfully honest account of lesbian life. 171 years after Lister's death and decades after her editing and publication,